Okay, I swore I would only do one more, but I just can't stay away. This is my final disenchantment theory video before the long wait for part 5. But it's gonna be a good one, I promise. This time we're gonna break down Bean's magical powers, exactly how they work, what various people want with those powers, and of course some good old-fashioned speculation about the nature of the Maruvian Prophecy, and all that. Ugh, this show's a lot. It's going to be a good time though, and if you like this theory, make sure to check out the other video I did about Freckles' true identity, and last year's video about how Mop Girl is definitely going to be the future ruler of Dreamland. Alright, let's dive in. Princess Tiabini Maria Beanie de la Rochambeau Grunkowicz, aka the Electric Princess. But what makes her the Electric Princess? Well, that's somewhat clear. She's got electric powers, but those aren't her only powers. Bean has also shown the ability to heal, but how, why, and what is the deal with these powers? Well, I think I've managed to work out exactly how they work, largely in part to some of the new stuff we learned in part 4, so let me break it down for you. We've seen Bean's lightning powers quite a few times now, but the first was in part 1 when she touched this magical orb.
Where is...
Now, admittedly, I'm not entirely sure what triggered this, but it's very telling that Dagmar immediately pulled Bean away as though she needed to hide these abilities, or maybe protect the orb. I think more likely to hide the abilities. Though the orb has shown to be able to see the past, and when the giantess Tess used it as her eye, she was overwhelmed by her ability to see the truth. So whether or not her powers or the prophecy relate to this orb remains to be seen, but it's definitely possible. Overall, I think this instance of the lightning was just meant to be the first tease of her greater abilities. But the next time we see Bean use these powers is in part 3 as Dagmar escapes the Trog Society.
I crown thee Queen of Lies.
This is a particularly interesting instance because while the power emanates from Bean, Dagmar seems to be the one who actually uses it to teleport away. It's possible that this could be a future aspect of Bean's abilities that she still needs to harness or master. The next time she uses her abilities are once again by accident while in Steamland. As she's being surrounded by these robots, in her anger she unleashes a barrage of electricity.
I don't have any magic!
Not just knocking out the robots, but the power in the entirety of Steamland as well. This is one of the most powerful instances of Bean's lightning for sure, but the next time we really see Bean use her abilities isn't until the last episode of part 4, when her seemingly evil dream doppelganger teaches her to harness her anger to use the lightning.
What about everyone who hurt you, who betrayed you, who laughed at you, blasted cats?
And this here is definitely the key to Bean's abilities. Strong emotions. When Bean harnesses her anger, frustration, and negative emotions, she's able to convert it into this destructive lightning. Even subconsciously, like we saw in Steamland. As Bean panicked while she was being cornered, she unleashed the lightning. But here's the other thing. There is definitely more to Bean's powers than just this force lightning. We've actually seen one other significant ability from Bean as well. Healing. In the beginning of part 4, in the episode Goon Baby Goon, Zog is scratched by these Maruvian arms that turn people into goons. Zog basically gives up hope, and as Bean laments his impending loss, she brushes her hand over his wound and it heals. And I believe that this healing, similar to the lightning, is triggered by specific, intense emotions. While lightning comes out due to Bean's anger or frustrations, the healing ability seems to occur when Bean is filled with grief, sadness, or potentially love. We know she is basically grieving the impending loss of her father. She is feeling love and grief for Zog in this moment. And while it might at first appear we've only seen Bean explicitly use this ability once, I think it's possible we've actually seen her use it as many as 4 times. Alright, let me explain. Let's jump back just earlier in part 4 to the very first episode, Love is Hell. In the part 3 finale, Lucy is beheaded as he sacrifices himself to try and save Bean, leaving Bean with Lucy's decapitated head. Then, in the part 4 premiere, Bean begins to grieve the loss of Lucy. She sheds a tear that falls onto Lucy's head, and look what happens.
My tear, it brought you back to life.
So are y'all sensing this pattern yet? In her sadness and grief, presumably because of her love for Lucy, Bean's tear resurrects even Lucy's disembodied head. Granted, he doesn't stay alive permanently, but he was just a head after all. And I think there are even 2 more instances that could apply to this same pattern. Moving back to the finale of part 2, Zog had been shot in the chest and was by all accounts from characters in the show, very close to dying. Now, Bean decides to remove the bullet from his chest, which obviously plays a big role, but this is another instance of Bean, filled with grief and love for somebody, making direct contact with them, leading to a major wound being healed not long afterwards. Zog had been literally bedridden close to death, and I don't think that simply removing the bullet would have allowed him to stand and move to his window like we saw him do at the end of this episode. It was just so quickly after the bullet was removed. How is he already standing and moving again? I fully think it's possible that this is another instance of Bean's healing abilities. I mean, his physical wound in his chest is basically just a scar by the very next episode. That seems like a pretty quick healing time. And there's one more previous instance where I think Bean's healing magic may have subtly come into play. Moving back again to Part 2, Episode 2, Bean and Lucy escape hell with Elfo's soul in this bottle. But when the bottle breaks, Bean basically has to mouth the soul back into Elfo, and for a few solid beats, it appears as though Elfo has died.
Elfo? Elfo!
It didn't work.
So let's break this down. Filled with overwhelming concern and potential grief over losing Elfo, Bean makes direct contact with Elfo's body, and though it appears he has died briefly, he ends up resurrecting. Now, this of course could just be the delayed effects of the soul being reinserted into his body, as we are led to believe, but given what we've seen on multiple other occasions, all of these instances have three common denominators: Bean, grief/love, and healing. It would kind of be wild if this was all just a coincidence, right? The nature of these powers seems to be a bigger question, because we've actually seen them displayed outside of Bean herself in a couple of ways. Back in the premiere of Part 2, we actually see Dagmar heal scratch marks on Bean's arm the exact same way we see Bean heal Zog in Part 4. And with the added fact that she seemed to use Bean's lightning to teleport in Part 3, and tried to hide Bean's abilities back in Part 2, I think it could be a fair assumption that Dagmar possesses some of, if not all of, these same abilities. They could be hereditary. At the very least, Dagmar is 100% aware of Bean's abilities and their development.
That's never happened before, the thing with my fingers.
As you reach maturity, you will notice many more changes.
So the question is, are these all powers that Bean has inherited from Dagmar, or are they related to the Maruvian Prophecy that involves Bean somehow, or both? On top of this, we see in a flashback to the battle between elves/mermaids and presumably the humans who stole Dreamland from them, that somebody enters the battlefield and immediately uses a barrage of lightning to disintegrate all of the elves and mermaids. Now, we obviously don't see who this is, but it is proof that the lightning ability seems to exist outside of Bean, unless the person somehow actually was Bean, even though this takes place in the ancient past. I guess this is as good a time as any to speculate about the Maruvian Prophecy. I'm not too confident in this, but if I were to guess, I would say that this person that we see in this ancient prophetic portrait isn't actually Bean, but is one of Bean's ancient ancestors, probably the one who appears in this battle in the cove and disintegrates the elves and mermaids. I expect that Maru has been working to reincarnate this ancient powerful ancestor Bean, which has finally led to the Bean we've been following in this show. If I were to just throw out a theory, I'd guess that the Maruvian contract with Hell granted Maru the power to conquer other countries, as we saw with Cremora and possibly Dreamland. But in exchange, I think Ancient Bean was meant to marry the devil, and it's possible that she died before the end of that contract could be fulfilled. Obviously, there's a lot more specifics that need to be explained or revealed in the show, but this is just my first guess at the Maruvian side of things. And if I was just going to keep spitballing, maybe Dagmar is resentful because she was meant to be the reincarnation of this ancient powerful ancestor, but turned out to be one generation removed, which could explain her manipulative actions throughout the series, down to this bait and switch where she becomes the Queen of Hell in Bean's place. But there is also this continuing development where various countries are trying to harness Dreamland's magic. But I think there's actually a difference between these countries and their interests. We know that Bentwood was trying to marry into Dreamland to take advantage of the alleged Dreamland magic, which I think is more about the goo than Bean's abilities. Obviously, the elves are also trying to take Dreamland back, partially to control the goo and partially because it's their ancestral home, but I think I have a pretty good idea of how Steamland figures into all of this as well. We see in Part 3 that Alva Gunderson is attempting to woo Bean in an attempt to connect Dreamland and Steamland. He believes that combining magic and science can be used as a force for good.
That science, or science as you call it, can harness that magic into a force for good.
But I think I've actually worked out exactly what Alva has in mind here, thanks to something he mentions in Part 4. We see mid-Part 3 that Steamland basically runs on the steam created by underground boiling aquifers in geothermal chambers. But in Part 4, Alva reveals that these geothermal chambers are actually providing steam to Steamland from Hell itself.
Besides, hell puts the steam in Steamland. Everyone knows that, geothermal chambers and all.
So this actually provides some really interesting context. Steamland is seemingly reliant on Hell for its steam and energy. They have some sort of deal, and as we all know, deals with the devil rarely work out in the long run. So I think that Elva actually wants to harness Bean's electric/lightning powers to replace the steam power in Steamland so that he no longer needs to be reliant on the literal devil and Hell to keep his society running. It tracks pretty well, right? He just hasn't really gotten the proper chance to explain all of this to Bean.
And along the way, Bean, you'll see something that will prove science, combined with magic, can take us beyond our wildest dreams. Ow!
And if you recall, the very first episode set in Steamland was called The Electric Princess. Even though this episode did not feature Bean's lightning powers at all, this implies that Bean being the Electric Princess is directly related to Steamland somehow. Okay, since this is probably the last Disenchantment video I'll do until part 5, let me take a quick little detour into dreams, because traveling through dreams themselves is another ability we've seen from Dagmar, but we've also seen it from other characters such as Freckles and sort of Bean now? It appears that some characters simply have the ability to travel within dreams for their own purposes. And I think that one of these people is actually Mora the Mermaid. Here's why. Obviously, we meet Mora in Steamland, but after her initial time on the boat with Bean, there are some very curious common occurrences when she appears. Mora's first reappearance is when Bean hits her head and passes out on the beaches of Dreamland. Mora then seemingly wakes up Bean and takes her on a full-on adventure to Mermaid Island. After the adventure, Bean wakes back up on the beach, believing that it was all a dream. In fact, every single time we've seen Mora since her initial introduction has actually come when Bean is unconscious in Dreamland. Every single time. The next is in part 4, episode 6. Bean nearly drowns in the remains of Dreamland Castle underwater. I always thought it was curious that they sat on the image of Bean unconscious underwater for so long. But now I think that this was a very deliberate hint. If Mora is connected to Bean primarily through dreams, this may have played out like this. Bean passes out underwater, but before dying, she begins to dream. This is how Mora, who can seemingly travel in and out of dreams, realizes that Bean is in trouble, and races to her actual location outside of the dream to save her. This would explain the amount of time it took between Bean passing out and Mora breaking through the glass. The next time we see Mora is actually in a dream. Bean is swimming through a crowd of trogs and elves and sea trogs. When we see Mora, she actually communicates to Bean to wake up.
Bean, wake up!
If Mora was just a part of the dream here, why would she be urging Bean to wake up? I think that this was Mora herself somehow traveling through Bean's dream. But even the final shot of the entire season reaffirms this observation. If you remember, before Dagmar drops Bean off of the balcony into the water, Bean actually falls and hits her head, passing out. Once again, Bean is unconscious, and this immediately leads to Mora reuniting with Bean underwater. Now, I obviously still haven't worked out all of the specifics of the dream traveling aspect of the show, but obviously all of these things cannot just be coincidences. With 4 examples, this is a certified pattern. And that is pretty much all I've got. Like I said, this will probably be the last Disenchantment video before part 5, unless I'm struck by some wild inspiration. But I want to hear what y'all think about these theories and observations. Do you think I'm onto anything here, or is this all bullshit? Let me know below in the comments, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Johnny to Cellos!